On June 9, 1980, the greatest team builder in the history of professional basketball made a phone call to Golden State. And when the dust settled, the man he had just acquired was not even the headline of the deal. He was the extra piece, the sweetener, the name you mention second, almost as an afterthought, right before you get to the part that actually mattered. The entire league had already made up its mind about him. He had never made an all-star team. 4 years, and his team had missed the playoffs 3 times. He was tall, sure, 7 feet, 1 inch. But tall did not mean much in a league full of tall men who could not win. And the whispers followed him everywhere he went. That he was soft, that he got himself into foul trouble on purpose so he could sit down and rest. The word that got used most often, the word that stuck to him like tar, was lazy. One man in the entire sport disagreed. One man looked at the exact same player, watched the exact same tape, heard the exact same criticisms, and came to the opposite conclusion. He believed this so-called throw-in was going to be a franchise center. He believed it enough to bet a #1 overall pick on it. And everyone around him thought he had finally lost his edge. His name was Robert Parish, and Red Auerbach was right about him. Nobody listened. In this video, we are going to show you exactly what Red Auerbach saw when everyone else saw a bust. We are going to walk through the trade that basketball people still study to this day, as a masterclass in seeing value where nobody else could. And by the end, you are going to understand why the quiet man from Shreveport ended up playing more games than any human being who had ever laced up a pair of basketball shoes. More than Kareem, more than Wilt, more than anyone. But to understand why Auerbach was right, you first have to understand why everybody else was so convinced he was wrong. Robert Lee Parish was born on August 30th, 1953 in Shreveport, Louisiana. And from the very beginning, he was different in a way that made people uncomfortable. He was enormous. He grew early and he grew fast. And by the time he was a teenager, he already had the frame of a grown man. But he was also quiet. Painfully quiet. Withdrawn in a way that people mistook for something else. Coaches wanted their big men to be fiery, loud, emotional. They wanted the guy in the middle to be a screamer, a growler, a physical presence who imposed his will and let you hear about it. Parish was none of those things. He did his work and he said nothing. And because he said nothing, people decided they knew what was going on inside his head. They decided he did not care. He played his high school ball at Woodlawn in Shreveport, and then he made a decision that told you everything about the kind of person he actually was. He stayed home. He went to Centenary College, a tiny school right there in his hometown, a program that almost nobody in the national spotlight was paying attention to. This was not the path of a young man chasing fame. This was a young man who valued something quieter, stability, familiarity, the comfort of being close to home. And what he did at Centenary was nothing short of spectacular. Over 4 seasons, he averaged 21.5 points and nearly 17 rebounds a game. Think about those numbers for a moment. Almost 17 rebounds, every single night. He dominated the glass in a way that should have made him a household name. He was so good, so obviously talented, that professional teams tried to grab him before he had even finished college. The Utah Stars of the old ABA drafted him in 1973 when he was barely out of high school. The San Antonio Spurs took a swing at him in 1975. Both times, Parish said no. Both times, he chose to stay in school, to finish what he started, to keep playing for the little school in the town where he grew up. That, right there, should have told everyone something. This was a young man with discipline, with loyalty, with the patience to see a commitment through to the end. But nobody read it that way. Because Parish never explained himself, he never gave the speeches, he never sold the narrative. He just did the work and let people draw their own conclusions. And people, being people, drew the wrong ones. When he finally entered the NBA draft in 1976, the Golden State Warriors selected him 8th overall. Now here is a detail that history has almost completely forgotten. Of all the players taken in the first round of that draft, only one future Hall of Famer went ahead of Robert Parish. One, and yet somehow, over the years, the story got twisted into the idea that Parish was some kind of afterthought, a middling prospect, a guy who nobody believed in. That is not true. Coming out of college, the talent was obvious to anyone who looked. The question was never whether Robert Parish had ability. The question, the one that would haunt him for 4 long years, was whether he had the fire. And he landed in the worst possible place to answer that question. The Golden State Warriors had won the NBA championship in 1975, the year before Parish arrived. But by the time he pulled on that jersey, the championship team was already crumbling. The core was aging. The pieces were being shipped out. The winning culture that had produced a title was evaporating right in front of him. Parish walked into a locker room that was, in his own later description, an assembly of misfits. Too many egos, too much independent thinking. Not enough of the glue that holds a real team together. And when a team like that loses, somebody has to take the blame. Somebody always does. In Golden State, that somebody became Robert Parish. His rookie year was modest, 9 points, 7 rebounds, coming off the bench for a veteran team. His second year, he grew into a bigger role, and his numbers climbed to 12 and 8. And then, in his third season, he broke out. He averaged more than 17 points and 12 rebounds a night. He finished 7th in the entire league in rebounding. He had one game against the New York Knicks where he put up 30 points and grabbed 32 rebounds. 32. That is not a lazy man's stat line. That is not a man who does not care. That is a big man taking over a basketball game in a way that only a handful of players in the world are physically capable of doing. But none of it mattered, because the Warriors kept losing. They missed the playoffs in 1978, they missed the playoffs in 1979, they missed them again in 1980. And every time that team failed, the finger got pointed at the big, quiet center in the middle. He was the highest pick on the roster. He was supposed to be the guy. So when the wins did not come, the losses became his fault. Parish felt it. He felt all of it. Years later, he would admit that during those Golden State years, he was seriously thinking about having a very short basketball career. The losing had ground him down. Being blamed for the collapse of a franchise he had walked into mid-collapse had drained something out of him. He understood the logic, even as he resented it. He was the #1 player taken by that team, so the blame fell on his shoulders. But he also knew the truth. Basketball is not an individual sport. It is a team game, and you cannot pin the failures of a broken team on one man in the middle and call it analysis. There was more to it than just the losing, too. The criticism of Parish during those years was not always about basketball. Some of it was uglier than that, and he carried those experiences quietly, the way he carried everything. He had learned a long time ago that explaining himself, defending himself, arguing his case, none of it changed anything, so he stayed silent. And the silence got read as indifference, over and over again. By the spring of 1980, the verdict on Robert Parish was essentially unanimous across the NBA. He was a talented body who did not maximize his gift. A stat compiler on a losing team. A guy who put up numbers but never made you feel like he was going to win you anything that mattered. The stoic expression, the calm demeanor, the refusal to emote, all of it got filed under the same conclusion. He was indifferent. He did not have the killer instinct. He was, in the cold language of the scouting world, soft. That was the book on Robert Parish. And in the entire league, exactly one man refused to read it. Now, to understand what happened next, you have to understand who Red Auerbach was. Because he was not just a general manager. He was, at that point, already the most successful team builder in the history of the sport. He had coached the Celtics to championship after championship. He had drafted and traded for the players who built dynasties. He had an eye for talent that bordered on the supernatural, and more importantly, he had a specific philosophy about big men that almost nobody else in the league truly believed. Auerbach was convinced that big men develop differently than everyone else, that a 7-footer takes longer to grow into his body, longer to figure out his game, longer to reach the potential that is locked inside all that size. Where other teams looked at a big man and demanded he dominate right now, this instant, or be labeled a failure, Auerbach was willing to wait. He understood that patience with a giant was not a weakness. It was a strategy. The big guy who looks like a disappointment at 26 might be a monster at 29. if you just give him the right situation and the time to get there. And when Auerbach looked at Robert Parish, he did not see a lazy underachiever. He saw a 7'1" center with a soft shooting touch, a nose for the ball, elite shot-blocking instincts, and 4 full years of NBA experience already banked. He saw a man who was already quietly one of the best rebounders and shot blockers in the entire league. Playing on a team so bad that nobody was paying attention, he saw a foundation. He saw exactly the kind of big man his whole philosophy was built around, a guy who just needed to get out of a losing environment and into a winning one. The Celtics had a problem that made all of this urgent. Their legendary center, Dave Cowens, was nearing the end. Boston needed a man in the middle, and they needed one who could anchor a team that was already very good. The season before, the Celtics had gone 61-21. They had just added a rookie named Larry Bird, who was about to change everything. They did not need to rebuild. They needed the final pieces to build a champion. And they had ammunition because they were sitting on the #1 overall pick in the 1980 draft. Here is where the genius comes in. Auerbach did not actually want to use that #1 pick. The consensus best prospect in the draft was a center out of Purdue named Joe Barry Carroll, and publicly Auerbach talked him up. But privately, he had zero interest in taking Carroll first overall. What he really wanted was a forward from the University of Minnesota named Kevin McHale, and he was convinced McHale would still be available at the 3rd pick. He also wanted a proven, experienced center right now, not a rookie who might pan out, a center who could step in and produce immediately. So he made the call to Golden State, and he constructed one of the most lopsided trades the sport has ever seen. Boston would send the #1 overall pick and the 13th overall pick to the Warriors. In return, Boston would receive the #3 overall pick and Robert Parish. Let that structure sink in, because it is the whole story. The Warriors were so eager to get their hands on that #1 pick, so certain that Joe Barry Carroll was going to be a star, that they were willing to give up a proven starting center and slide down 2 spots in the draft to do it. And in Golden State's mind, the real prize they were surrendering was the draft position. Parish was the extra. The Boston front office, years later, said it out loud. In fairness, Robert was a throw-in. The whole reason they made the deal was to get McHale. Parish just came along for the ride, a throw-in. That is how the man was valued on the single most important day of his professional life. Not the centerpiece, not even close. The guy you tack on to make the numbers work, and Red Auerbach could not have been happier. He said as much at the time. He said there were 3 great players in that draft, and with this one trade, he had wound up with one of them, plus Parish. He talked about Parish specifically and listened to how differently he described the same player everybody else had written off. He said he had just bought himself an experienced center, a guy who gets you 10 or 12 rebounds every night, a guy who can score, a guy who was already 6th or 7th in the entire league in blocked shots. This was not the description of a throw-in. This was the description of a franchise cornerstone. Auerbach saw it in plain daylight, and he could barely believe his luck that nobody else did. The Warriors used that precious #1 pick on Joe Barry Carroll. He had a decent NBA career. He made one All-Star team, but he also picked up a nickname along the way that told you how his effort was perceived. They started calling him Joe Barely Cares. The irony is almost too perfect. Golden State traded away the man they thought was lazy to acquire a man who would become the poster child for indifference. With the 13th pick, the Warriors took a forward named Ricky Brown, who was out of the league in a few short years. Boston took Kevin McHale 3rd, and just like that, in a single afternoon, Red Auerbach had assembled 2/3 of what would become, in the eyes of many, the greatest frontcourt in the history of professional basketball. But all of that was still just a theory, a bet, a projection. Robert Parish had not yet played a single minute for the Boston Celtics, and the entire NBA was waiting, quietly, to watch Red Auerbach's famous eye for talent finally fail him. Because everybody knew what Robert Parish was. Everybody except the one man who mattered. Then the game started, and the theory turned into something no one could argue with. Dave Cowens, the veteran center Parish was brought in to eventually replace, suddenly retired right before the season. Just like that, there was no waiting period, no easing in. The starting center job in Boston on a championship contender belonged to Robert Parish from day one. And the man who could supposedly not carry a team, the man who supposedly did not care, stepped into that spotlight and delivered immediately. In his very first season with the Celtics, Parish averaged almost 19 points and 9.5 rebounds across all 82 games. 82. He did not miss a single one. The durability that would come to define his entire legend was there from the start. And more than the numbers, there was the transformation. The same player who looked disengaged in Golden State looked completely alive in Boston. He ran the floor like a gazelle. He blocked shots. He rebounded. And that high, soft, arcing jump shot of his started falling with a consistency that made defenders look silly. It turned out that Robert Parish was never lazy. He was never soft. He was never indifferent. He was a serious professional trapped inside a losing organization that had turned toxic, surrounded by teammates who did not pull in the same direction, blamed for failures that were never his to own. Put that exact same man into a functional, winning environment, surround him with players who cared as much as he did, and the truth came pouring out. The problem in Golden State was never Robert Parish. Red Auerbach had understood that all along. His teammate Cedric Maxwell gave him a nickname that season that would follow him for the rest of his life. He called him Chief, after the big, silent, powerful character from the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It fit him perfectly. The quiet giant who says almost nothing, and then, in the moment it matters most, reveals a strength that nobody saw coming. That was Parish. That was the Chief. And the winning started right away. In that very first season together, the new-look Celtics, with Bird, McHale, and Parish, marched all the way to the NBA Finals and beat the Houston Rockets to win the championship. Robert Parish, the throw-in, the guy nobody wanted, the supposed underachiever, was an NBA champion in his first year out of Golden State. The man who had been seriously considering quitting basketball entirely, worn down by all the losing and all the blame, was now standing at the very top of the sport. But he was just getting started. Over the next several years, the frontcourt of Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert Parish became a nightmare that the rest of the league simply could not solve. They called them the Big Three, and the description of how they worked together tells you exactly why Parish was so essential, even if the headlines never went to him. Bird was the genius, the once-in-a-generation basketball mind who could do everything. McHale was the technician, the low-post artist with the most unstoppable collection of moves anyone had ever seen. And Parish was the foundation, the anchor, the man who held the whole thing up. He did the work that never made the highlight reels. He set the screens. He protected the rim. He controlled the glass on both ends of the floor. He ran the floor in transition better than any big man of his era, beating other centers down the court for easy baskets. And when the offense needed a reliable release valve, there was that jump shot, the one Parish launched with such a high arc that people said it looked like it was going to kiss the championship banners hanging in the rafters of the old Boston Garden before it came down through the net. Bill Walton, a Hall of Fame center himself who backed Parish up during one of those championship seasons, put it as plainly as anyone ever has. He said Robert Parish was probably the best medium-range shooting big man in the history of the game, coming from a man who had seen every great center of multiple generations up close. That is not a small statement. That is the exact skill set Auerbach had identified from a distance, watching a supposedly indifferent center on a losing team in Oakland. The Celtics reached the finals 5 times in the 1980s. They won it all in 1981. They won it again in 1984 in an unforgettable, brutal, physical war against Magic Johnson and the Los Angeles Lakers. A series so heated and so violent that it revived the greatest rivalry in the history of American team sports. That was a series decided by toughness, by who could absorb more punishment and keep coming, and Parish was right in the middle of every collision. And they won a 3rd title in 1986, with a team that many people still consider one of the greatest single-season squads ever assembled. Through all of it, Parish was the constant in the middle, not the star, never the star, but the piece without which none of it worked. When Bird needed room to operate, it was Parish drawing the opposing center away from the paint. When McHale went to work on the low block, it was Parish spacing the floor with that jumper. When the other team pushed the ball in transition, it was Parish getting back to protect the rim. He was everywhere, doing everything, and asking for none of the credit. And the accolades finally started to catch up to the reality. The man who never made a single All-Star team in 4 years at Golden State made the All-Star game 9 times as a Celtic. 9 times. He made 7 of them in a row. He was named to the All-NBA team. He finished among the top 10 in the league in field goal percentage for 6 straight seasons. Every single piece of the reputation that Golden State had hung around his neck got dismantled, quietly and thoroughly, 1 season at a time, by the man himself. Everything Red Auerbach had seen came true. The experienced center who would give you 10 or 12 rebounds a night. The scorer, the shot blocker. The foundation of a champion. Auerbach had described the finished product before it existed, and then he had gone out and acquired it for the low price of a draft pick he did not even want to use. The throw-in had become the anchor of a dynasty. But here is the part of the story that elevates Robert Parish from a great player who got vindicated into something close to a miracle. Because being right about the championships was one thing. What Auerbach could not possibly have predicted, what nobody could have predicted, was how long this man was going to last. Remember, this was a player who arrived in the league already carrying whispers about his durability. There were people who genuinely believed, back in 1980, that Robert Parish would not have a long career. He had a history of nagging issues, he was a big man, and big men break down. The common wisdom said his body would wear out. Parish himself never had grand ambitions about longevity. He said his goal, when he came into the league, was simply to play for 10 years. 10 good years and a solid career. That was the dream. He blew past 10 years like they were nothing. He played 14 seasons for the Boston Celtics. 14. He was there for the entire glorious run of the 1980s, and then he stayed through the lean years that followed, after Bird retired and McHale retired, holding the franchise together with the same quiet professionalism he had always brought. When he finally left Boston, he had appeared in more than 1,100 games for the Celtics alone. He had become the franchise's all-time leader in blocked shots, in offensive rebounds, in defensive rebounds, records that still stand for one of the most storied franchises in all of sports. And even then, he was not done. After Boston, he signed with the Charlotte Hornets and played 2 more seasons. 2 more years of a body that supposedly was not going to last. And then, in what should have been the twilight of any normal career, he did something extraordinary. At the age of 43, he signed with the Chicago Bulls, Michael Jordan's Bulls, and in 1997, Robert Parish won his 4th NBA championship, this time as the oldest man on a team chasing history. 4 championships, 2 decades apart at the ends, one with different teams in different eras, against completely different competition. The man they called a throw-in in 1980 was still winning titles in 1997. And when he finally walked away, retiring at 43 after his 21st season, the record book told a story that no amount of doubt could ever erase. Robert Parish had played in 1,611 regular season games, more than any player in the history of the National Basketball Association, more than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, more than Wilt Chamberlain, more than every legend, every Iron Man, every durable warrior who had ever played the game. For decades, that record stood completely untouched, until finally, in the modern era, LeBron James became the only human being ever to surpass it. Think about what that number actually represents. Out of a possible 1,722 games across his career, Parish missed only 111. He averaged 77 games played per season, year after year after year, from the physical brawling NBA of the late 1970s all the way into the modern game of the mid-1990s. He survived eras. He outlasted the hand-checking, the hard fouls, the endless pounding in the paint that broke down big men half his age. Rules changed around him. Styles changed around him. Whole generations of players came into the league, made their names, and retired while Robert Parish was still out there in the middle, still rebounding, still blocking shots, still lofting that impossible, high-arcing jumper toward the rafters. He was the third oldest man ever to step onto an NBA court. In a league obsessed with peaks and explosions and moments, Robert Parish built the most permanent legacy of anyone. He was simply always there, every night, for 21 years. In a sport that chews men up and spits them out, that kind of endurance is not luck. It is professionalism raised to the level of art. When he retired, he ranked among the top 10 players in NBA history in scoring, in total rebounds, in blocked shots, and in field goals made. He finished with more than 23,000 points and nearly 15,000 rebounds. The lazy man, the soft man, the man who did not care. The honors came flooding in, one after another, each one another quiet rebuke to everyone who had doubted him. In 1996, while he was still playing, the NBA named him one of the 50 greatest players in the history of the league. On a single night in January of 1998, the Boston Celtics raised his number 00 jersey into the rafters of their arena, hanging it alongside the greatest names the franchise had ever produced, with Larry Bird and Kevin McHale standing right there to honor him. In 2003, Robert Parish was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame, taking his place among the immortals. And in 2021, when the NBA celebrated its 75th anniversary and named the greatest players of all time, there he was again. Robert Parish, the Chief. Every single one of those honors was a sentence in the same argument. The argument that Red Auerbach had made all alone back in 1980, when the whole basketball world was laughing at him for wanting a soft, indifferent, lazy underachiever from a losing team in Oakland. So what did Auerbach actually see? What did he understand that an entire league of scouts and executives and coaches somehow missed? He understood that the criticisms of Robert Parish were describing a situation, not a player. The losing was real, but it was not Parish's fault. The blame was real, but it was misplaced. The quiet was real, but it was not indifference. It was character. Auerbach had spent his whole life around basketball players, and he had learned to see past the noise, past the reputation, past the easy narrative that everyone else was so eager to repeat. He looked at the tape and he saw the rebounds. He saw the blocked shots. He saw the soft shooting touch on a 7'1" frame. He saw the 4 years of experience. He saw a professional, and he trusted his own eyes over the entire chorus of doubters. That is the hardest thing in the world to do in any evaluation of talent. To sit in a room where every voice around you agrees on the same conclusion, to hear the same verdict repeated so many times it starts to sound like fact, and to still say no, quietly, to yourself, I see something different. Most people cannot do it. The pull of the crowd is too strong. It takes a special kind of confidence earned over a lifetime to bet a #1 overall pick against the unanimous opinion of your entire profession. Auerbach had that confidence. And he was right. He also understood something deeper about big men that the modern game has since proven over and over again. That size takes time. That patience with a giant is not naivety, it is wisdom. That the 7-footer who looks like a disappointment in a broken situation is not a lost cause. He is an opportunity if you have the vision to see it and the patience to wait for it. Auerbach had that vision when nobody else did, and he was rewarded with 3 championships in the 1980s and a foundation piece who would still be winning titles 17 years later. The tragedy, if you can call it that, is how close the story came to never happening. If Golden State had valued Parish correctly, they never would have thrown him into that trade. If any other team in the league had seen what Auerbach saw, they would have moved heaven and earth to acquire him instead. But nobody did. Nobody listened to the evidence right in front of them. The whole sport looked at Robert Parish and saw a throw-in, and it took one stubborn old genius in Boston to see the truth. That the throw-in was a Hall of Famer. That the underachiever was one of the most consistent winners the game would ever know. That the man who did not care would end up caring longer and lasting longer than anyone in the history of the league. Robert Parish never said much about any of it. That was never his way. He let the banners and the rings and the records do the talking, the same way he always had. But every time that number 00 jersey hangs there in the rafters, every time someone opens the record book and sees his name at the top of the games played list for all those years, Every time the big three of Bird, McHale, and Parish gets mentioned as the greatest frontcourt ever assembled, it stands as a permanent monument to a simple truth. Red Auerbach was right about Robert Parish.